The conditions that were initially set were based on the flawed interpretation by the CSIRO, who, by the way, I hold in very high regard, but in this instance I think that they have made very serious errors. They based their interpretation of the impact of the emissions from industry on a study by Cinderby et al. On the impact of industry emissions and air pollution on monuments. And even the authors of that study say there is an incorrect use of their work, of their study, in its interpretation of that work by the Gillett 2008 report, the CSIRO report. So you've got here a set of conditions that are based on flawed interpretation of data that have then been written that guide the monitoring and the conditions that will happen, or the conditions that will on this plant that's already been built now in the Burrup, on the Burrup. Not only that, but the monitoring process that has been undertaken of the previous conditions from the other plants that are on the Burrup has also been found wanting. Now, it was very difficult to get some of the information at the beginning of this process out of the West Australian government. That's significantly changed under the ALP government, I will say, when they came in. However, we're still battling, and there's still an uphill battle to get them to recognise the full extent of the impact that this plant, particularly cumulative effect, in other words, the new plant with the existing gas processing plants that are there and the existing fertiliser plant that are there. They will be having a cumulative impact. And one of the recommendations in the Greens' additional comments is that there be a study done of the cumulative impacts. Other recommendations, and we've made 15 recommendations in our additional comments. I want to say the Greens have, but specifically Senator Whish-Wilson and myself. We recommend that the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act be amended to require the minister or their delegate to consider the cumulative impacts when approving decisions, and that's certainly what needs to be done here. They need to be assessing the cumulative impacts. There also needs to be an acknowledgement by CSIRO that the assessment they did was fundamentally flawed, because it was. We also recommend that the West Australian government prioritise the development and implementation of a new and fully funded independent monitoring program that meets all of the recommendations of the Data Analysis Australia reviews. The problems here were so intense that they had to have an independent review of the data, of the process, and they made a series of recommendations. One of the key things that we also recommend is, in fact, the plant be moved. See, what also happened in Western Australia is a number of years ago, in fact it was so long ago that I was still a coordinator of the Conservation Council, I remember commenting on this proposal, is they set up a new area precinct for industry on the Pilbara, on the peninsula, up near the peninsula, a bit south of the peninsula but in the Pilbara, called the Maitland Industrial Estate, so that industry could locate there. And that was an area that there was very little fighting over once they got the basic approvals for locating industry there. Now, this plant could have gone there, and it should be there, because there are ongoing problems with fugitive emissions and with emissions that are way over of nitrate, that are way over what should be emitted, and we document that, or we've referred to that in our additional comments. We also recommend that the Commonwealth Government, in conjunction with the West Australian Government, establish measurements of existing emissions as a matter of priority, because we're not even doing that properly. We also recommend that the West Australian Government implement measures to ensure that the emissions load on the Burrup is reduced. It's absolutely critical, because I, for one, have absolutely no faith in the monitoring results that we have seen, with the evidence that I have heard, that we understand the impact of the emissions on this world-famous and rock art of world importance. The last comments I'll make in my last 30 seconds is that we should put this area on the tentative World Heritage List. Australia should, in consultation with the West Australian Government and the Mugajuga Aboriginal Corporation. We should be putting this on the tentative World Heritage List and then working with the corporation and with the West Australian Government to make sure this is listed on the World Heritage List. This is clearly of World Heritage value. It needs to be listed, and it needs to be listed as soon as possible.